I had a bit of an epiphany this morning. I was listening to not an old Stone Ape recording, the Stone Ape recording that I recorded with Heron in October this year. And my wife I listen in the shower. Let's just put that out there. Let's make that perfectly clear. And my wife came in and said to me, "Why are you listening to this?" And she turned it off. And I realized in that instant that I had recorded a podcast very recently, A Long Funk, which you may or may not have listened to, where I used the term spiritual matters really badly. And it kind of irked me in a very strange way when I listened to it in review. But then I realized that I probably had gotten this terminology from Heron Stone, and it is not a native Tom terminology. So I thought I have to go back and re-record that whole bit and put it out in A Long Funk to make it a little bit more intelligible for people. And I really feel that Noble Ape is becoming a bit of a kind of neglected child of mine. I'm actually devoting a lot more time to my music, and I want to get out another set of tracks before the end of the year. I did a recording on November 9th for about an hour and a half. And unlike the prior recording, which became a good portion of Last Monkey Standing, or really the last half of Last Monkey Standing, I didn't break a sweat in this one. When I recorded the Last Monkey Standing section, the last half of it, I was sweating really heavily by the end. I was really getting into it. And I think if you listen to the title track, Last Monkey Standing, you hear some of that, because that intro to Last Monkey Standing is actually towards the end of that performance, where I'm really just dripping with sweat and my fingers are moving in a kind of strange robotic-like state. So reflecting on the November 9th recording, it's completely tonally different, and I want to get it out just to have it out, because the production and the post-processing and the analysis and all this kind of stuff, you've got the tunes going on, basically, but you just need to get them out. So I'm devoting so much of my free after-hours time to actually getting this music out that it's taking away from my Noble Ape time, and particularly the Mushroom Boy. Now, through Model Rail Radio, I had a request from a new listener to reintroduce all the participants as they call in to Model Rail Radio. And it's an interesting task to actually do. It's an interesting degree of formality. So allow me, for folks who are new to this podcast, to reintroduce the Mushroom Boy, or to introduce, more importantly, and also to introduce Noble Ape. The Mushroom Boy is a simulation of an urban environment, and I wrote it in 1997 as, in part, to be based on the Noble Ape simulation, but also in part to make a very strong political message about the miscreant nature of a young mind. And the idea of the Mushroom Boy originally was associated with a child, 13, 15-year-old kid, who builds a dirty bomb after years' worth of tinkering. He actually gets the stuff within clocks, the luminescence that makes clocks glow in the evening, and also he gets various bits and pieces from record players, and he puts this together and creates a dirty bomb. But the actual aim of the Mushroom Boy is to simulate an urban environment to an extreme level of detail, to take it down to, individual rooms, individual entities cooking dinner, and then zoom out to this huge cityscape. And then you have this boy kind of weaving his way through this environment, trying to avoid the secret police, maybe the Gestapo, this kind of idea. And also there's a simulation built within it that relates to public narrative. So there's a media, and then there's a public narrative which the Mushroom Boy is trying to surf along as he tries to escape from these secret agents as well. It has elements of Maxis products. Maxis products had news that came out. The SimCity, for example, had newspapers that gave constant reviews of how the mayor, which is the role that you're playing in SimCity, is doing. And the Mushroom Boy does that as well as a kind of newspaper feed to it, which gives updates associated with Mushroom Boy and relates to how he deals with the general population. It's a very curious and complex set of simulations, which ultimately has Noble Ape at its core in terms of a lot of the background to it, a lot of mathematics, and even some of the cognitive simulation, and just these elements are all from Noble Ape, but it has a lot of additional stuff to it. The cityscape is just one part of that thing. But when I came to rewrite the Mushroom Boy, and I'd rewritten the Mushroom Boy a few times, but in the final integration, which is what is available on GitLab now, this was really just mainly looking at the cityscape and how I could more easily integrate the Noble Ape simulation into that. And the complexity and the problems that I found through this have been based on design decisions that I've made at various points. And because of the kind of additional narrative associated with Apple's dropping of OpenGL and me having to rewrite it in Metal, but then also having to create a low-level graphics engine to do a bunch of additional stuff, it just overloaded the space. So I think I'm going to go back to simplicity in the Mushroom Boy and just simulate maybe just a couple of houses and a few fences and look at how, 4 or 5 noble apes interact with that small environment before I throw it back to the cityscape. Because throwing it back to the cityscape is where the debugging, if you've got 100 noble apes walking through a city of hundreds of houses, it's complexity in a kind of ridiculous scale. So debugging at that scale is far more difficult than debugging at 2 or 3 houses. So I'm going to shrink it all down. I'm going to create a noble suburb or something like that, maybe a noble block, and just have noble apes wandering through that. So I can tune some of this in just a single screen where I can identify the interactions and keep the visuals in a very easy to define space for debugging purposes. But returning to this notion of simulated spirituality and what I was trying to do through that, ultimately what I'm saying is, for the Noble Ape simulation, what I want is some way to create organized religion. And I think it's in the original manuals, I talk about the notion of radical apes and normative apes and all this kind of stuff. And really, religion, as I read about it through the Dark Ages, is very much a means of justifying royalty and royal hierarchies. It doesn't really have it's not an applied thing aside from doing group control. And I've wondered how to actually simulate that degree of group control, and maybe having simulated spirits that have a certain degree of interaction would be an interesting way of just seeing, can you create organized religion with the claimed byproducts of organized religion, or will you actually get something distinctly more curious out of this thing? So when I talk about spirituality, I'm really saying, in the previous podcast, I'm looking for a way of simulating organized religion without notions of radicals or normative forces or these kind of things. Or maybe I should just bite the bullet and create narratives of radicals and normalized forces on populations. It seems to be a bit of a curious way to, it's all a bit too straight-laced as far as I'm concerned. So this is the short-term and medium-term projects that I'm looking at with Noble Ape currently, and I need to define Noble Ape as well. Noble Ape has been a project of mine, I guess, for 22 years now. The idea originally was to simulate a few monkey-like creatures, ape-like creatures, really wandering over an island, and then to vastly increase the space. Now, in the island itself, it was still designed to simulate down to insects and sticks and rocks, this level. So, relatively small island environment, but still simulated down to a relatively low resolution to see how these ape-like creatures developed identities out of landscapes and feeding grounds and weather and all this other kind of curious stuff which impacts small populations of primates probably more than it should. So that was the original idea of Noble Ape, in contrast to the Mushroom Boy. And these are projects that I continue to maintain, not for anything more than just personal curiosity. My wife also pointed out to me as I was listening to this Stone Ape recording that I really only produce podcasts for myself, and I'm just lucky that other people sometimes like these podcasts too, which I thought was an equally valid narrative to be offering. So I wanted to go back and not re-record, but just offer a different take associated with what I was trying to say with spirituality, organized spirituality. I'm actually talking about normative religion and how to simulate normative religion without giving any credence to any existing normative religions, but looking at ways that I could try to simulate that in a Noble Ape space with a little bit of philosophical satire thrown in. That's really critical in Noble Ape. That's a critical element there. So, yes, I hope I've been able to instill perhaps slightly better what I was trying to do through that, and also talk a little bit about the music and how all consuming it is currently. My hope is that I will get something out by the end of the year. I think it's doable. I've just got to reduce scope on some tracks and put other tracks together and have a lot more play time. The music is very good for play. It's very good for experimenting and trying various tricks and techniques and throwing in additional instruments and all these kind of things. So anyway, hopefully I've distilled some of these ideas in a podcast form and people will let me be with regards to them.